for Bruce-Grey-Owen Sound.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I want to thank my colleague for providing me the opportunity today to do something that I have no problem doing, and that's bashing the Taliban. I have zero time for the Taliban regime, and for those that maybe not be aware that might be listening today, I had the privilege to serve this country in uniform, but spend 14 months of my life in Afghanistan, and I'd offered this, and I've offered it before. The Afghan people are no different than any other people around this world. They're no different than Canadians. They're people that just want to live in peace and have a chance to provide their families, their relatives, their friends with a chance to have a better life. And unfortunately, under the Taliban, that is something, especially the women and girls, don't have that same opportunity that that those of us here in Western Canada, or in the West and in Canada in particular. So I just want to share a little bit of history about Canada's involvement here and my personal experiences, and maybe where we got things right and where we got things wrong. I honestly believe when the West first got involved in Canada, first got involved shortly after 9/11 in Afghanistan, it was much needed. We needed to do something in a country that was harboring terrorist organizations like Al-Qaeda and, that helped perpetrate the attack of 9/11. And we had Canadians over there right off the get-go down in the Kandahar region. But more important, we actually had Canadians involved in Kabul, in the capital city, right from the get-go, trying to make fundamental changes to the way that country works, from a mentoring and strategic advisory team that was in Kabul. And that's where our sort of focus was on that training for quite some time, until about the 2006 timeframe, when the Canadian Armed Forces then got deployed, and the government of the day, the Liberal government of the day, decided it was time for Canada to step up and engage in the fighting that was going on in the south, in particular in the Kandahar region. And I think our Canadian Armed Forces soldiers did themselves proud and did this country proud with the incredible service and sacrifices that they made. In around the 2011 timeframe, Madam Speaker, we then transitioned from the south and back up to Kabul, and really focused our efforts as part of the NATO training mission and the Canadian contribution to that, to again try to build that institutional capacity. And again, this was all why we were still fighting the Taliban, and trying to again create that situation and the long-term success for the country of Afghanistan and the people. And ultimately, Madam Speaker, Canada then decided in 2014 to withdraw our Canadian soldiers that were on the ground, with the exception of a minor detachment still supporting our embassy. And ultimately, though, what we saw happen, though, was the fall of Kabul and the fall of Afghanistan back to the Taliban in 2021. Before I get into the specifics of that, though, I do want to draw and highlight the incredible sacrifices 158 Canadian soldiers, 7 Canadian civilians made in that country. Some of them that I knew very well and very personally. I lost 6 of my own soldiers while I was there. And it's something that was, it was the crappiest day of my life, Madam Speaker, the only day that was tougher when you're communicating to family members after the fact. And unfortunately, we're still losing Canadians to this day due to that mission, due to post-traumatic stress and suicide, which is something that we should be doing our darndest to prevent. But I want to explain a little bit about who the Taliban are and why I have so, dare I say, use the word hatred for them, and why Canada needs to do more in opposing that regime. This is a regime that treats people, and as I mentioned already, women and girls are treated more, cattle and sheep have better treatment than the women and girls in Afghanistan. I moved my combat team in 2007 up to Gorak to escort an Afghan army company up there to reinforce an Afghan National Police outpost. And we got there about 24 hours too late because there was a young boy, 7-8-year-old boy, and his father that were just beheaded and hung 24 hours earlier because they dared to provide local food and bread to those Afghan police forces. This is a Taliban regime that if girls try to go to school, they get acid thrown in their face in the streets. They do not respect human rights. And this is why I have no problem speaking out against them, and I think this is why this motion is so pertinent today. The member from Shepherd identified and brought up the issue of where Afghanistan is going backwards. I couldn't agree more. This is why this motion is pertinent to be brought forward and debated today in the House, and why I thank the committee for actually moving this motion, because it does allow us to continue to bring attention to the horrific issues that are going on in Afghanistan. What happened in 2021, Madam Speaker, this is where, again, we saw the fall of Kabul, and instead of us focusing as a country to focus all efforts to get those Afghans out, especially those Afghans that helped Canada in a timely fashion, unfortunately, the government of the day was more focused on calling an election and campaigning and not focused on putting all our assets forward. But what really irritates me even more, Madam Speaker, is the signals, the intelligence that was publicly available months and months ahead of what happened in August of 2021. There was indications that the Taliban, well, as soon as the U.S. government had signaled that they were going to withdraw their support, that this was likely going to happen. There's lots of experts out there that predicated that maybe it wasn't going to happen as quickly as it did. However, the signs were there, and we needed to do more sooner. And where I'm frustrated even to this day, and I have the privilege to work with members across all parties, and we've been working since last October to get former Afghan women members of parliament out of that country. And we started that initiative last October. Unfortunately, we needed to go public in January of this year because one of those women MPs, former MPs, was killed just because she represents everything that the Taliban detest. And this is why, again, this is so important that we continue to do more. Where I've been very critical, and I've had frank and honest conversations with the Minister of Immigration, and, you know, I believe his heart's in the right place, Madam Speaker, but we're not doing enough. The country, Canada, is committed to bringing 40,000 Afghans to Canada. I think we're around the 30,000 Afghan mark now. Unfortunately, I'm still critical that the efforts are in the wrong place. They're in Afghans that have already got out of Afghanistan. They're not focused on those ones that are still stuck in that country, and their situation's just getting worse by the day. We have former Afghans that have helped Canada, that are here in Canada, that are literally protesting out in the streets this past week and weeks past because they can't get their family out, and the bureaucracy behind it drives me nuts. So I just want to say, Madam Speaker, Canada continues to need to do more. It can't be just about, as you know, keeping the Taliban listed as a terrorist organization. As a member before me from Sherwood Park, Fort Saskatchewan mentioned, you know, we've got a government that refuses to list some organizations as terrorist organizations, but in the end, that's not enough. We need to do more to put pressure on the Taliban regime to respect human rights, to respect women and girls. And if we don't do that, things will continue to slide in the opposite direction. I'll conclude, Madam Speaker. I do have hope. I have hope that those better parts of almost 2 decades of Afghan women and girls getting educated, seeing that they have a better hope for the future, that one of them one day will be back in Afghanistan, leading that country, and maybe we'll see a day in the not too distant future where Afghanistan is a democracy. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
comments. Questions et commentaires. The honourable member for, I just want to make sure I get it right. The Honourable Député de Shefford.
The honourable member for Shefford. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'd like to thank my colleague for his speech. He really talked about a lot of things, PTSD, among other things. I've been interested in that since 2000. And also he talked about the Government of Canada's commitment toward Afghan interpreters. And I discovered in 2021 a significant Afghani community in Shefford. People came to my constituency office and they said, do something. They were worried about their sisters and aunts and daughters still back in Afghanistan. They talked about anything that gives women an image of greater freedom is seen as a threat by the Taliban, and some of these women have even had death threats against them. So what does my colleague have to say about that?
Well, look, I talked about that at length, Madam Speaker. That is the challenge. The Afghans don't treat women and girls to the same level as everybody else. They literally will put controls in place. We've seen in the last year alone. First, they took away the right for elementary school age girls to go to school. Then they've just saw in the last 6 months or less all university education opportunities for women to be educated in the least. The good news, Madam Speaker, is that there are still women getting educated. I'm well aware through contacts of education, training, and opposition and protests going on. My final quick comment, and I don't know if it was the member or maybe the translator, Afghani is the currency in Afghanistan, not the people. So it's always Afghan. Use the term Afghan, not Afghani. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Questions and comments? The Honourable for Vancouver East.
Madam Speaker, and I thank the member for his comments. As the member indicated, one of the issue that I certainly have a lot of problems with the government's inaction, and that is bringing Afghans who served Canada, who helped Canada to fulfill their missions, and now they have been left behind. And particularly their family members, their loved ones have been left behind. The government put in an arbitrary quota with the number of Afghans that can be brought to Canada to safety. Would the members support the NDP's call for the government to lift the cap?
Honourable member for Bruce-Grey-Owen Sound.
Short answer is absolutely, Madam Speaker. I don't think it should be about numbers. I spoke about we're focused on the wrong things, and what I'm scared of is if the government turns around, they hit that cap, that quota of 40,000 Afghans, and then they shut it off. Because in the end, we need to get those Afghans that are at the greatest risk, which is those ones that help Canada, help the West, that are still stuck in Afghanistan out, and we've got to be committed to that. And the reason why, Madam Speaker, as a nation, if we want to be able to leverage local populations, to have interpreters, cultural workers, people that will help us when we deploy either our military, our diplomats, or non-government organizations around the globe, they need to trust that by them stepping forward and helping us, that when they are in trouble, we're going to be willing to help them. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Question, the Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Public Safety.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. The Honourable member knows that this motion was passed at the Justice Committee right after we passed Bill C-41, and today we were able to pass that bill here in the House. I wonder if the Honourable member could talk about the importance of getting aid into Afghanistan, because not everybody can leave, and how important that bill is to get passed.
Brief answer, 1 minute for response. The Honourable from Bruce-Grey-Owen Sound.
Thanks, Madam Speaker. Look, I totally agree, and that's the challenge. And to be frank, and I've said this in the House before, I was split on Bill C-41 because I know some of the money is going to end up in the Taliban's hands, right? It's the nature of the beast there. The world's a complicated place, and that's why I actually have concerns with it. I know I disagree with some of my colleagues that have been working on these efforts behind the scenes that they don't think the bill goes far enough in providing, that there's some safeguards that the government's put in place. But ultimately, we do need to do it. That's why I voted in support of it. But we need to get that aid in, but at the same time, it can't be getting overly abused and misused, and that's the challenge here. So it's a messy situation, and it's one where I really feel, we could have done more sooner, and I really wish the West had never pulled out completely, because ultimately this is an example of where we as the West failed. We need to do more in the future.
Resuming debate, the honourable parliamentary